Alright, I am back with another video, something a little bit different this time, and I'll explain why when I get to the end of the video. But for now, just know that I'm doing something a little bit different. Whereas I would normally do a regular build, this is more of a build concept. Something that you can start to build quite early on in the game, and then build further upon as you go into the late game, or kind of the mid game. Because everything I'm going to be showing here can be obtained fairly early on. To get a start on what this build concept kind of is, if you can guess from the title, this is sort of a cantrip-based elemental Gish. We're playing an Eldritch Knight Fighter, which I've taken to level 7 for the purpose of showing off a certain ability, but obviously you can just play a regular Eldritch Knight Fighter until you get to this point as you go through the game. But basically what this is we're using certain items and equipment that we get early on to bolster our cantrips and our weapon attacks basically at the same time, and I'll get into what I mean as we go. So the first piece of equipment that's really important to this kind of concept is the Necklace of Elemental Augmentation. When one of your elemental cantrips, so cantrips that deal ice, cold, fire, lightning, or thunder damage, when you use these, you add your spell casting modifier to the damage result. So in the case of an Eldritch Knight Fighter, you'll be casting your cantrips with intelligence. So with the average kind of early Eldritch Knight Fighter, so to say like your level 1 stats, which I'll kind of have displayed on screen, you're kind of looking at basically your first cantrips being able to be casted with a pretty decent modifier already. So your cantrips, even at level 1, or I guess by the time you get this, you'll probably be about level 4 to 5, depending on how quickly you go through the Act 1 main quest, or if you just skip it entirely and just go straight to getting these items, which you can do. This will do quite a lot for you. It's a really nice ability. So let's kind of keep going here. The Ring of Elemental Infusion. When you deal elemental cantrip damage, or with a spell, you infuse your weapon, which deals an extra 1d4 of damage on its next attack of the element that you used. So, you gain a big buff to your cantrip, and then your next weapon attack also gets a buff. But there's more with this second ring. When you deal damage with a cantrip, you gain Arcane Synergy for 2 turns. For those of you that don't know what Arcane Synergy is, it essentially means that your weapon attacks deal damage equal to your spellcasting modifier. So, your cantrips are doing damage equal to this modifier, and so are your melee attacks, including the 1d4 you get as well. So the idea with the early game, I guess, even before you get extra attack, would be cantrip 1 turn, and then weapon attack for next, giving you both ranged and melee options while staying on theme with a Gish. So overall, you're going to be getting a good chunk of elemental and magic damage, and a good chunk of weapon damage. But there is a little bit more to this build, and I'll get into that in a second. Let's move on to the armor. You take 1 less slashing damage. This is a jolty vest, I should say. You take 1 less slashing damage, and when the wearer takes damage while having lightning charges, the attacker must succeed a dex saving throw or become shocked. For those of you that don't know, shocked, you cannot take reactions and has disadvantage on ability checks and saving throws using dexterity. This is basically just a nice option that works with our build, or I guess build concept. I'm not really sure what I should be saying. That you can get really early on pretty easily. Moving on, we have the Daredevil Gloves. The wearer gains a +1 bonus to spell attack rolls. Nice, that buffs our cantrips, I believe. Let me just double check that. Yeah, I'm pretty certain it buffs our cantrips. But here's the cool thing. Daredevil Proximity. Your ranged spell attacks are made as melee spell attacks when you are adjacent to a hostile creature. So basically what this means is it's kind of like Crossbow Expert, but for spells. You won't be taking disadvantage on spell attacks when you are adjacent to an enemy. So that means you can cast any of your cantrips, or something for example like Scorching Ray, at melee range with no penalty to hit. This is actually surprisingly powerful, and I wish I knew this was in the game sooner, because I might have used it on something like, I don't know, maybe my Virgil build. But I feel like this does a lot for our build, and I think that it basically gives you full free reign over which cantrips and which spells to use, whether you're in melee or you know, firing range. So I think it's pretty good. The Disintegrating Nightwalkers, this is just a really nice pair of boots that you can get in Act 1. Cannot be enwebbed, entangled, or ensnared, and cannot slip on grease or ice, and you get a free use of Misty Step once per short rest as a bonus action. Pretty nice. Moving on to the bow, because it's less important than our melee weapon. It's basically just a ranged option that we get, and when the wielder deals damage with this weapon, they gain 2 lightning charges. Pretty nice. It's just a nice ranged option to have if your maneuverability doesn't really let you get in place for a melee weapon attack. You can use this if you want to, but it's not really necessary. The main thing we want it for is if we want to build up lightning charges, which synergizes with the Jolty Vest, and then lightning charges themselves, if you are not aware. Lightning courses through you. You have a +1 to attack rolls, pretty nice, and deal an additional 1 lightning damage. Okay. If you gain 5 charges, they are consumed, and the next time you deal damage, you deal an additional 1 to 8 lightning damage. So, basically, if you use this bow to build up a little bit of lightning damage, and then you can use that lightning charges, my apologies, and then you can use the Jolty Vest to kind of use those defensively, so you get a bit of extra defense. You can kind of gain a little bit extra here, but this is mainly just tacked on because, I mean, you can just use the basic fighter armor you get right at the start, and this will be fine for pretty much most of the game, up to where you'd get this equipment. But the Jolty Vest is just that little bit of extra utility, and for the same armor class, so you're literally only getting a benefit from taking this. But let's get on to the main kicker of this build, and this discovery of this kind of weapon, like figuring out where you could actually get it, is kind of what prompted me to actually make this video. This is the Knife of the Undermountain King. Its main ability, it's a +2 weapon, which is really nice, but its main ability is the wielder scores a critical hit when rolling a 19. That's pretty powerful. And when they roll 2 damage or less, re-roll the dice taking the highest result. So you're always going to be dealing a decent chunk of damage with this weapon, especially when combined with our equipment here. Because this weapon doesn't just apply this buff to its initial attack. Any added bonuses, such as the one we get from the Elemental Infusion Ring, will be counted. So we're getting our spellcasting modifier on this attack from our Arcane Synergy, and then we're also going to be hitting for at least 3 or 4 on each of our extra d4 attacks, in addition to whatever damage the weapon does. So I think this is a pretty interesting combination. But the cool thing about this is all of this equipment can be obtained before going to the Shadow Curse lands in Act 2. So basically you can get this as early as kind of around the end of Act 1, start of Act 2. Again, you could just go straight to getting most of this equipment. While I obviously, for spoiler reasons, will not be saying how to get all of this equipment, just know that, like, most of this equipment comes from the Githyanki Crash in some shape or form, which is fairly early on, so that's not really a spoiler. And you can get it fairly easy either by buying it, so if you just kind of save up your money, you can buy, I believe it's these two. And then, from then on, you find all of this equipment either looting it from chests, or looting it from people, or buying it. Basically, I will put links, as I always do, to the items wiki pages in the description, so you can find them. But obviously, this is kind of like the basic level. If you get this equipment, you're pretty much set to continue going with this concept until you feel like it stops working. However, I feel like the basic idea of this cantrip Gish with these specific pieces of equipment here, and maybe the Daredevil gloves as well, can work pretty much into the end game. You can stick with this theme and concept, and it will still be powerful as you level up, because your weapon and cantrip attacks are going to be scaling up. Maybe the Ring of Elemental Infusion could be replaced if you don't care about that extra d4 damage, but I feel like it is just extra damage you're getting for free. This could probably be replaced, but I like keeping it on here for the theme. So, what about if you wanted to go the little bit extra mile? Obviously, if you don't feel like putting all those points into intelligence right off the bat, you can go for the Warped Headband of Intellect to immediately set your score to 17 until you get to the point where you can level it up to 18, so that it should be kind of after the when you get your first ability score improvement at level 4. If you use the stats I outlined earlier, you could put this straight up to 18 and do pretty well there. But this is a good thing you can get early on if you don't want to put your points into intelligence right away, and then once you've used this long enough and you surpass it, then you just swap it out for something better. I will go over this as well. This is the diadem of Arcane Synergy. This basically gives you Arcane Synergy whenever you inflict a condition, in which case maybe the shocked condition from Shocking Grasp or our armor. However, this 2 turns of Arcane Synergy does not stack with the 2 turns of Arcane Synergy that we get from the ring, so it's basically worthless since there are better headpieces you can get. At the same vendor you buy the Daredevil gloves from, you can also get the gloves Dexterity. If you've watched my videos, you know about this piece of equipment. Sets your Dexterity score to 18 and gives you a +1 to attack. Pretty good. Obviously it's a bit more expensive than the Daredevil gloves, so it could be a bit more tricky to afford depending on your charisma score, which unfortunately we have at the neutral setting here, but you can obviously, like I say, adjust that. But obviously this is a very, very powerful option if you don't care about the ranged spell attack thing, so I'm just throwing it in here since you could get it in the same breath as all this other stuff. And then I will talk about probably the strongest armor sets you can get as a fighter in this early Act 1, that being the Adamantine Scale Mail, which is medium, and the Adamantine Split, which is rare heavy armor. Obviously, I didn't really want to make these part of the main build, because yes, while you can get them while still being in Act 1, you do have to fight an extremely powerful boss, one that I would even call maybe kind of bordering on super boss levels, for this early in the game at least. I think when I fought that boss initially I was level 6 and I had a pretty tricky time because I didn't even think to use the unique mechanic in that fight, but if you successfully beat it and you get the materials, you can make either of these armor sets, which obviously it eclipses what we've already got. It's just really, really good. Let's go over them really quickly. The Adamantine Scale Mail reduces all incoming damage by 1. When a melee attack hits you, the attacker is sent reeling for 2 turns, which I will just show is basically it gives them a -1 penalty to attack rolls for every time they have it, so 2 turns they have a little bit less of a chance to hit you. You still take disadvantage on stealth checks, unfortunately, but attackers can't land critical hits against you. This is true for both armors. Really, really strong, and with our current dexterity score being 16, the medium armor has the same amount of AC that the heavy armor will give us. As for the heavy armor version, it reduces all incoming damage by 2, so a little bit stronger there. The reeling lasts for an extra turn, and you still have the same disadvantage on stealth checks and being unable to have critical hits be used on you. So overall, it's a pick your favorites kind of deal, whichever you prefer. I guess the look of, to me, I kind of like the overall look of the Scale Mail more, but it's really up to you, depending on what you want, stat-wise. My apologies. But either way, you're going to be coming out of this with an AC of 18. But yeah, I feel like with that, I'll swap back to the kind of main build here. You have a solid base to start something. Now, obviously this is not a complete build. There is more work to be done here. But I feel like I can introduce... Actually, I will go over this really quickly. This is Falar Aluv. I forgot to mention this. I apologize. If you find that the Knife of the Undermountain King is way too expensive for you, this is a really solid alternative. Slightly less power, but it's still a finesse weapon as a longsword, so that will still work with all of our stuff. You can use it with your dexterity, because obviously we're lacking in strength. And obviously you get the Falar Aluv Melody, which kind of gives you slightly alternate versions of Bane and Bless that you can use as an action. So definitely worth picking up if the Undermountain King knife is a bit too out of your price range. So I'll leave that there. This new format for video making has just put me all over the place. Anyways, so with this concept, what could you do? Well, the obvious thing that I'm going to go over here is taking Eldritch Knight straight up to level 7, because there is a key ability that you get from Eldritch Knight which makes this build work. And let me see if I can find it real quick. I mean, obviously you get extra attack level 5. War Magic, here we are. You have honed your body and mind for war. After you cast a cantrip, you can make a weapon attack using a bonus action. So, you now have your regular extra attack, or you can go for that cantrip melee weapon hit in a single turn. Now, obviously, later on in the game, if you get a weapon that can just attack during its bonus attack anyway, something like Belm or Duelist Prerogative, which I've used in a few builds, you won't need this ability anymore, because you can just use the regular bonus action attack that those already have. So, you can instead go for, like, different levels in something. But I honestly think Eldritch Knight Fighter going all the way to 12, giving you 4 total feats and a bunch of good utility spells, like Misty Step, Darkness, Scorching Ray, Magic Missile, Chromatic Orb, and an extra cantrip, can be just a really strong, simple, viable build with this kind of setup. Obviously getting stronger armor and weapons as you go, but keeping this base concept using this equipment here can just carry you pretty far into the late game while still keeping the overall feel of an elemental Gish. Otherwise, you can go to level 7 fighter if you still want the war magic, or just go to level 5 for extra attack, and then go the rest of your levels wizard, giving you more attacks, more spells, staying on theme, and way more spell slots, giving you a lot more overall utility as a spellcaster, while maybe sacrificing some martial range. Obviously, I've built Eldritch Knight Wizards before. My most popular video, thank you by the way, is the Psionic Warrior, which has received some criticism, justified criticism, from people who have come in from all over the community, which I appreciate, and I'm using the feedback that I get, well, right now. So obviously you can go with that. There's also obviously a few extra options here, since we're using finesse weapons and blah, 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 blah. A monk might fit nicely. A Way of the Four Elements monk could fit in pretty well here. Maybe keep Eldritch Knight a bit lower, just so you get all the utility that you want again, and then maybe go the rest of the way in Four Elements monk to kind of keep with that elemental theme, although note that your class actions will not count towards any of this, so maybe not the best idea, especially since wisdom doesn't really work out here. There's a few things you could do. I would personally either go all the way Eldritch Knight Fighter, or maybe go into a wizard dip to get more utility spells. In fact, that is probably the strongest option, or the strongest options, but I won't say for certain here, because again, this is a concept, so it's up to myself and the community and the guys and everyone who watches these videos to kind of play around with this and go, hey, you know, maybe this would work or this would work, and then we kind of come together and it all works out. I'm just presenting an idea of this unique little synergy that I found so that people can take that concept further. And then, yeah, I guess that's it. I can't think of anything else to talk about. I mean, obviously this is a much shorter video, but like I say, I'm basically just introducing this concept that can be built upon further. So why have I done this video today? Well, I know people say don't look at YouTube comments and whatever, but as someone who's kind of like doing this for fun and is kind of getting into it and loves discussion, there's been a lot of comments, like I say, kind of criticizing my way of doing things, and I'm not against criticism, but I'm also like kind of, and I'm trying to take it into my mind, but it also is kind of like, I mean, the amount of people who don't watch videos all the way through before commentating is kind of funny, but pretty much most people have been really, really good sports about this. There are a couple who would just kind of complain and move on, but the few people that I've actually gone back and forth with on stuff have actually been really, really understanding and cool people, and that's like 99% of you, so good stuff. But the main two things I've had kind of come up is, number one, my videos are way too long, and I can understand why that might be a turn-off for some people. My last video, the Skill Monkey build with Cornelius, was deliberately designed to be shorter, because I wanted to kind of say, hey, this is a kind of like level 4 build that you can build upon, and this build is kind of the same, because I kind of wanted to go a little bit shorter. And then the other one, and this is the big criticism, and this is the one I really, really took to heart, was that, and apparently I'm not the only one guilty of this, other build-making YouTubers have been doing this, which I haven't really been watching, but except for D4, Colby, because he's awesome. But apparently the big thing that a lot of people are doing, myself included, I'm guilty of this, is just doing final level builds, whereby really by the time you have all this gear in at level 12, the game is pretty much over, so it's pointless. And I always framed my videos as, basically, this is a goal to strive towards. This is a theme that you can look at, build upon, use your better judgment to adjust as you level, and then respec into the final thing when you're ready, when you have the equipment. But now looking back on it, I feel like the people who brought up this criticism had a really, really good point. And while I do think there is a place for my original style of video where I'm just showing these final builds, I also do think there is a much more prevalent place for videos of this style, where I I talk about it something that you can yourself build upon and will make work for you in your own preferred style as you play through a 40 to 60 hour RPG, as it has been quoted to me. And that's a fair point. I come from a build making background for the Souls games, so like Dark Souls, Elden Ring, Bloodborne, all that good stuff. And obviously, from that, with those games, you can kind of just go straight to the equipment if you know where it is and make a solid build right off the bat. And I feel like that was the approach I went into with this game, and now that I've taken all this criticism to heart and really thought about it, I do feel like this is the wrong approach. Baldur's Gate 3 is a really, really long game, and if you're making a build specifically based on something you've seen in one of my videos, and it just feels like crap to play until you get there, then there's not much point, and I think I understand that. So this is why this build came about. It was a concept I had already, but I adjusted it for this kind of video where I'm talking about it at a much lower level of play, and I think this works better as something that now I've presented this concept. If that gives you the idea and you want to go forward with it, then you can and build it your own way. So this is where I need you guys to really, really come in with the comments here. I need to see if this style or my original style is the preferred format for these videos. Of course, I can continue to make build videos as I have before. I might do my best to take into account each stage of play, maybe providing equipment for each, like maybe each act, and then do that. That's a lot of extra work for me though, and I kind of just like theory crafting a final build, but I can do that if that's kind of what people want to go with, or if we prefer these shorter versions of videos where I just present this idea and people build off of that, I can work on that too. But yeah, I believe that is going to be it for me. I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I say, experimental format might not work out too well, and if so, I'll just go back to the original format, but this is where I want you guys to have your input. So, thank you all so much for watching, and goodbye, I suppose.